Good afternoon. We are so excited to have Kelly Tweeddale, who is the Executive Director of the San Francisco Ballet, for our second round of Global Conversations, Navigating Difficult Times. And we are really honored that Kelly's joining us because she's sort of the epitome of doing it with grace and with a very strong vision for the future, flexibility, innovation, plus she's a lot of fun. So we're really excited to welcome her. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Liza. Thanks for having me.
We are so excited you're joining us. So we could go on literally all day and into tomorrow about your background, which is quite extensive, but tell us a little bit about it and what you did before San Francisco Ballet, why you decided to take the job, what's exciting you about it.
Thanks. Well, I'd say that my career in the performing arts has been just best decision I ever made. I was in the corporate world as a young graduate from university, and I saw a job because I was a lover of the arts for a symphony orchestra to be an advertising manager, and I took a leap of faith and I took a job at half my salary, and it was the best decision I ever made. I learned a lot. I was a curious, ambitious young woman, and I rose through the ranks and ended up going from Seattle to the Cleveland Orchestra, which is one of the finest orchestras in the world. Yep. And I was director of marketing communications. And in that role, I really learned what it was like to work for a major organization where excellence was its number one call to fame, and really had a clear idea of who they were working on an international scale. And then I had the opportunity to come back to Seattle to be closer to family, and I joined the opera world, where I spent 15 years of my career going from symphony to opera. And I found myself after less than a year in the job being asked if I would step into the leadership position. And so here I was, a new leader in an executive director job. With my colleagues, and I learned a lot about what that feels like. But there were not women in the field. There were not women in the opera field at the executive director level at that point in time. Very few, and none in the symphony. So I found myself surrounded by men, and also boardrooms were very, very male at that point. And then from that, I actually got an invitation to go up to Canada and work with the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, which had done something that was just fabulous. They had created a school, and I always said orchestras should do what ballet companies do. They should really feed their pipeline by developing a school. And Vancouver is one of the only places where that has happened, and a purpose-built school. And so I was asked to join them as CEO and president. And it was an opportunity for me to also learn how to manage in a different country and a different business model of funding and how things work. And it was just a fabulous experience. It was really coming into my own. And then I got this phone call for San Francisco Ballet. And this would have been my dream job when I was first entering the field. And so here I am.
So there's obviously a bunch of questions I want to ask you. One of them, having been outside the US, looking in, because some of the people we're interviewing are, Tamara Rojo, et cetera, are operating in an environment where there is at least some national support. And I remember from my dear friend, Patricia Barreto, we had a conversation, we lost her recently, had a conversation about the funding model in Canada, with which she was quite familiar. Mm-hmm. They do have, I believe, some national funding there, right? But it's more on a regional level, or regional councils?
Actually, it's both. And so I would say Canada is kind of a hybrid between the US model and the European model. And in Canada, yes, individuals support very generously their organizations, but they do so because they know at least 50% of funding or less will come from other entities, government entities. So at Vancouver, it was about a third. So a
Okay.
third came from government, a third came from individuals, private, and a third came from corporate and foundations. But what was interesting is, and the majority of that funding comes from the federal level for major organizations, and the second part comes from the provincial level. But they were moving to a merit-based strategy at the federal level. And so the timing was where it had been formulaic before that, based on size. And so my arrival in the US system, you always lead through merit. What have you done? Impact. So I felt really well prepared.
Are you having any culture shock at all coming back to the United States from Canada?
Yeah, yes and no. When I first came to Canada, I think as an American, many people believe that Canada is a softer, kinder side of the US, and that's so, that is so untrue. It's its own country, it's its own culture, and so you learn that really quickly. But I had a great board member where I was struggling of how to have conversations, because we have conversations and then nothing would happen. And I would say, what am I doing wrong? And she said, okay, you have to understand this. In Canada, we stand for justice, and it's balancing the scales and making sure everybody is heard and balanced. And in the US, you lead with liberty. You fight for what you care about and meaning for. And she said both are equally important, but it's about process. So we changed the process, and it was really helpful for me. So now I come back where we're, especially during COVID-19 and George Floyd murder and the social conversations that are happening here right now. I find myself in that world of liberty and fighting for what you believe in, but having just spent the last 4 years in balancing the scales. How do we use what I learned in Canada, which was actually so beautiful because they're so far ahead in the conversation of reconciliation, and still embrace this fighting for what we believe in?
So in Canada, that's around the First Nation peoples?
Yes, absolutely. First Nations is something that I spent a lot of time with. It was, I was really the student coming into a culture that I hadn't been part of the systemic conversations that had been going on.
About where you are at San Francisco in terms of, as a city, what you can do and what you can't do in terms of getting the company together, and what you're beginning to see going forward.
We have found ourselves at the head of how we manage this, because at the beginning there wasn't a lot of where do we go, who do we talk to. But what we did find out is when we captured the creativity of our entire organization, not just admin, but the dancers, the musicians, everybody, and just said, now is our time to engage with our public, remind them that we are here and to tell our story. And let's take as many rules away as we possibly can. And everybody leaned in and said, yes, let's do that. And that's what we've been doing ever since. In these cases, being a bit naive sometimes works to your advantage, because you can't see how hard it's going to be getting through the rule breaking. So we've been creating any way we can. So whether that's been on the Zoom rooms, whether that's been dancers filming themselves in their apartments and their kitchens, our artistic director, Helgi Thomason, is just completing a project with all of the protocols in place, where we went outdoors with dancers who had been sheltering together to tell our story in this moment in time. And I think he asked 4 choreographers to work with him on this, a film director, and just to push the envelope of what could be done in this time. So that's underway. So that's giving us a real good sense of what we might be able to do if we are in this sheltered environment. And then finally, getting our dancers back to the studios. That's our number one, it's their livelihoods. And so partnering with public health and really doing it safely, and up until this point, we have been able to keep everybody's health insurance and everybody paid and intact. Now we're having the conversations, what comes next? If we're not going to be able to have audiences, can we return to the stage? And the city is talking with us. What would that look like? So if we can get to rehearsal, then can we return to the stage and capture? And then release. And we've been releasing every Friday until July 6th. We had first, we called Flashback Friday, just to get what does it take to be able to stream content? And what does that look like? And we have the highest engagement that we've ever had of audiences. And that's made a big difference.
That's fantastic. So I'm curious, are you getting any feedback about why you're getting so much engagement? Do people miss the ballet generally? Are you doing something particularly right? Is it the mix? And is it the same people that you were seeing before, or are you getting new audiences?
One is people are missing the live, the live experience. And they remember, you know what, when we are busy in our normal lives and there's this thought that, oh, I'll go next week or I'll catch the next performances. All of a sudden people have had to sit with the idea that there may not be a next performance. We don't know what that looks like. And they are feeling how much they miss it. And there's only so much we can do with our cell phones and in our Zoom rooms to try to represent dance. Dance needs dimension and space, and it needs all of these things that we don't have right now. And so when they see it on the screen, they're reminded what we've lost. You know, this freedom, this movement, this beauty, everything is really dark right now in our pandemic conversations, in our political conversations. There is not a lot of light. And so being reminded that there is beauty and dimension out there is resonating with people. I think the other thing that is surprised us is that there have been pieces we have put on stage that when you re-look at them in the screen, they look different and they feel different.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's pieces that weren't as resonating on the big stage in a live audience that actually jump out. And that's exciting to people as well. And then we're finding, as you said, are we getting new people? Yes. So we made the choice to stream everything without a paywall at this point in time, because we felt that why monetize something when we are all in the same place? We are all sheltered. We are all suffering. We are all dealing with challenges. So that allowed anybody in the world to watch and to connect with us. And that's been really interesting. We have over 1 million views of all of our streams collectively, and people are engaging in a way that they haven't. And that can only help us down the road.
So that's the upside, and I'm trying to find an upside. Why is this relevant today, particularly at a time of social unrest? And what is the appropriate role at San Francisco Ballet, of any performing arts organization to respond to it? And then I'm going to get really tough here. What does an appropriate and real response look like?
I do believe live performances of small and large connect with people, regardless of the genre. And the genres that I have been privileged to work for are storytelling genres, but they also are an emotional narrative. They connect emotionally. And I think that keeps them relevant. But with that said, and especially ballet, and I'm the newest to enter into ballet, is that it is an art form that in today's conversation and with diversity and the conversation of aesthetics is no longer a valid conversation that we can have. We look at our mission statement, and our mission statement is to bring the joy of dance to as many people as possible. And so now is a time to really look at the questions of why are there not more people of color in leadership roles? You know, there are people of color in our dance companies. Are they moving forward? Are they moving up? And if they're not, why? And that is the conversation that we are asked to reckon with. And I don't have the answers. I feel like I'm at the beginning. I'm a beginning journey, and but I know that I'm committed in the same way as any other entity, business should be committed at this time to have those conversations. But one company is not going to change the 100 years of ballet. It's going to take all of us.
You sort of model your vision of where we might be in 2 years, 5 years, both in terms of what a company should look like, but also in terms of, you know, if we don't have a vaccine, if we're not going back, and perhaps that's okay, to the world it was before, how do you think San Francisco Ballet could look or should look going forward?
Yeah, I do have high optimism that because we sheltered early and we are in a community that is being really careful, that we will find a way to get back to company class and rehearsing, because that is absolutely, if we can't do that, nothing else is possible. It isn't. And because we have a professional training school, I think we also have the opportunity to bring the people who have committed their future careers back to the studio safely. Once we do that, I believe that if we focus on creativity, what can we create with the obstacles? Because it won't be business as usual. It will be that we are going to have to create in a different way. And I think that's where we're going to be able to take away all of the excuses. You know, there won't be the excuses of we've always done it this way, because we're going to come back and there'll be no playbook for this.
That's a great point. I had not thought about it in those terms, but what a great way to frame it, which is we're not going to go back to doing things the way we did before, because that's just not going to work on so many different levels.
I do believe that this, at least at SF Ballet, I think in the next 2 years, is taking away some of the rules and looking at creativity that comes from our dancer force, our students, was absolutely resonating, because people want to know the stories behind the dances that are created. So there's only a certain amount of information you can give when somebody is creating a perfect piece. What people are yearning for is the story behind that piece, the why. Why are you doing it? How was it created? What were you thinking?
Yep. And meeting, as we did in round one, meeting 9 amazing women and understanding their background and how their education, literally where they come from and how it informs the work. So I think that's a very optimistic view. The one thing you haven't talked about is, how do you see, if you see, collaboration going forward with other entities in San Francisco, with other art forms?
Yeah, I think that in collaboration, there's several different levels of collaboration. There's creative collaboration, which is the area where we tend to know how to do that, best. But I think the collaboration which we are discovering, and I think that the large organizations like the SF Ballet will have a harder time of it, because we are bigger. There's many layers of us. But what we have actually discovered is that when we collaborate, we actually have more ideas, and when you have more ideas, those ideas resonate with more people. And when you have more people who are resonating, you have larger fan base. When you have a larger fan base, then, when and if we get back to an audience, there are going to be people who follow us in. There are also people who, in the U.S., contribute. That's at least 50% of our livelihood is based on people loving us. How do we use our assets and our resources differently, not to help us, but to help our community? I think those are the areas of collaboration that have been dormant in many organizations, including ours. And I think that thinking about how do we have the conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, yes, internally, but how do we partner with others externally and have that conversation?
You are really upfront, which I think is super useful because you're so well known in the field about this being a tough time, about as a leader having some anxiety, it just being hard. And I'd love it if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit, talking about that, because I think very often we feel like we can't appear at all anxious, nervous, disturbed. And I truly believe almost everybody is trying to do the best they can. So I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about how you cope with what's got to be a fairly crushing load, running a massive company and being fairly new to it.
There's no playbook for this. And so the self-doubt that you have every moment as you're finding your way. And when I say the self-doubt is, number one, am I preparing to show up the way people need me to show up when I feel like getting this wrong? It could start with a pandemic. The pandemic, people's lives are in danger. Healthcare, all of those things. And you know, in our organizations, we have 360, employees where that is the concern, whether they're a dancer, whether they're an orchestra member, whether they're a student, and that is a daunting responsibility. So, I think part of it is keeping yourself personally centered so that you can show up to be the person that you know that the organization needs you to be. And so I have my own rituals that I do, yoga, staying active, a recovering marathon runner, that helps me reset.
I think how success looks happens on so many levels at a time like now. Are you looking at having X number of choreographers of color or promoting, women, people of color into positions? And, do you have metrics around that? What does successful creation look like? What does successful, engagement with various new audiences, new your old audiences look like? How do you support your dancers? It just goes on and on. I mean, everything's being reinvented at the same time. And we did talk about you running, and I want to talk a little bit about that, sort of switch over to you. The reluctant marathoner who didn't know she was a great athlete and ends up qualifying for Boston right away. Right. I don't know if that's a metaphor for your life and your career, but it could be.
Yeah, maybe. I will tell that story just because it was a transformation for me. So successful in my career, pretty late in life to become a runner at, your late 40s, 48, 49, looking at that bucket list of what are you going to do before you're 50. And my sister was the one that says you should run a marathon. And I said, that is the last thing that would be on my list. And I had told myself my entire life that, number one, I didn't like running. Number two, I wasn't good at it. And I believed all those things. And then she said, well, just start training. We'll just start training. So I agreed. She's older. It was a bonding time for us. And we trained to do a half marathon. And nothing horrible happened to me. Somehow I did it, And then she said, you really should do a marathon. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. So anyway, I did the marathon and I ended up qualifying for Boston, as you said. But yeah, and I didn't even know what that meant. I was naive.
Oh, I do. I'm from Boston.
Well, and I ran on my 50th, week after my 50th birthday, and I qualified again. So I ran Boston 4 times, New York once, and couple others. But here's the point though. The thing that stuck with me, and it has stuck with me ever since, is my entire life, I told myself a narrative, and it wasn't true. And it wasn't until I explored it and just went to that beginner place to say, oh, I wonder what would happen if, with no expectations, that I discovered that. So I do in this time, even though I'm not running long distances anymore, remind myself, allow yourself to wonder, allow yourself to be open enough that you don't need to know the end result. This is not a race. This is not about qualifying. If I knew what qualifying meant, I wouldn't even have attempted it, but I think that is what I learned. And it does take, because these days are grueling, all of us that are trying to keep our organizations alive and afloat 24/7, you think about, what if I made the wrong decision? What if that decision is the one that's going to bring us down? And to say, you know what, you just have to put it out there. You have to wonder and be open to not knowing the answers. Ambiguity at this point in time is something that you have to embrace.
What is the correct model, or is there a model for the relationship between an artistic director and executive director? And I've seen it done very differently at different companies and in different ways. But, Helgi as an institution has been there for a long time. Clearly, if you were going to take the job and it was your dream job, you also had to be copacetic, feel good working with him. Could you talk a little bit about how you all work that out and how that feels and how that changes on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Maybe it is because I feel like my job, I am not the artistic director, but my job is to make sure all artistic projects and those visions are possible. And I've always had, whether it's the artistic director, general director, music director, great relationships, a great partnership, because I can't do my job if I don't know the why. So this curiosity, so with Helgi from day one, and I know a lot of people commented on this because I would just make a trail to his office, and I would just every day or whatever, and I would just ask him why. So and what I found as I asked questions, we had these deep conversations about why and what, and he has all this history that I don't have. And then I also could share a perspective with him. And my relationship with Helgi and anybody in the artistic curation role is one that has to be developed on trust. And I trust that he had an artistic reason why, but I also trusted it was my job to understand that. He recently announced that we will do another festival, and that festival will be diversity. And that's because we've been having these deep conversations, that when he invites choreographers, that they're going to represent underrepresented creators in the world of ballet. And I don't think we could have had that conversation on day one if we hadn't had this conversation back and forth.
Okay, here we go. Here's the fun stuff. Lightning round. Favorite ballet, symphony, opera, all of the above?
It's always whatever we're working on right now. Whatever I like in the moment.
Sweet or savory?
Besides chocolate, savory.
This is cruel a little bit, but we're asking everybody, dream destination post-COVID, where you would go.
So, well, Greece, the island of Corfu, because I've been binge watching the Durrells of Corfu. Yeah, that sounds like just, beautiful.
Guilty pleasure.
Guilty pleasure. Oh, binge watching Outlander.
That was a good one. Favorite theater or opera house?
McCall Hall in Seattle. I put my heart and soul in that theater. It was a renovation, but it's a beautiful new opera house. And yeah.
So there's actually a little bit of you physically,
a little bit.
spiritually in the walls of that place. Favorite city, and you can pick more than one and for a particular thing.
Oh, of course, Paris. I love Paris. So that comes to mind. Although we recently, as a company, as a ballet, went to Copenhagen, and I fell in love with Copenhagen. I would go back there in a minute.
Beach or mountain?
Oh, beach.
You a beach girl. Which would you rather watch, rehearsal or performance?
Performance. I like to be the person that, if you see everything in the rehearsal, you know what, everything, and how the sausage was made, and you lose that magic moment at the performance.
Thank you so much for your time. I will tell you, some of the women I admire most in ballet have just been raving about, you may not know this, but you're an inspiration for them. They've taken and joy from listening to you and reading some of what you've written. So.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm just honored that you invited me.
All right. Well, Dance Data Project says thank you so much to Kelly Tweeddale, and we're looking forward to seeing what's next. It sounds like the future is pretty secure in her hands. Thank you.
Thank you.